Started. So today's presentation is Managing 5 Generations in the Workplace. And our presenter is Kim Bellum. She's currently the director for Marty College, the Watertown campus. Before that, she was Dean of Academics at Lake Area Tech. She was also a high school principal. So she's been an educator and administrator for 35 years. She brings us a wealth of knowledge. She's also been honored as Assistant Principal of the Year and Administrator of the Year here in South Dakota. So welcome, Kim, and I will hand it over to you.
Thank you, Michelle, and welcome to all of you. I apologize that we're not face-to-face, but with the things that are going on, who knew? So I've not done this virtually before, so I'll give it my best shot. And if you do have questions, please type them in the chat, or after the presentation, if you want to get a hold of me too, there will be contact information sent out, so you certainly feel free to do that. So I usually do it in about a 90-minute time block, so in 50 minutes, I'm going to kind of go as quickly as I can and make sure I cover the key points. We might skip a couple of slides in the essence of time. Michelle is supposed to be my timekeeper, so we'll keep going through this. One of the reasons that I think this is so important for you as high school people or whether you're post-secondary is just that as we're training and educating students today to go out and work with the different generations, if they're aware of the differences in the generations and can understand them, I think it better prepares them for the workforce and going out there. So we saw a lot of that the last 15 years when I was at Lake Area, and I know in the college and the post-secondary and the high school setting, I think as we move forward, particularly now with everything that's happened with the pandemic and the economy, you're going to see more and more people staying in the workforce longer, and of course 5 generations of students working, or people working together with our students that are currently entering the workforce. So this is a presentation that actually President Cartney from Lake Area Technical College now put together with me, and we did together, so I'll go through it quickly with you. I want you to watch the short video clip and tell me what most surprises you in there. So here we go. We'll see if the technology works. when I give this presentation in public, I always ask the audience what most surprises them in that video clip, and I get a lot of different answers depending on the generation of students in the audience, because we give this to a lot of our students on Lake Area Tech's campus as they're getting ready to go out and join the workforce. And a lot of them say the one about who's on Twitter, grandparents, of course, and they also say that the one about the more people own a mobile device than a toothbrush. And of course, for educators, I think the one that concerns me the most is that goldfish have a longer attention span than we do. So anyway, just some interesting facts there for you. So for the purpose of this talk today, we're going to talk about 5 straight generations of affluence, which means that this generation has more than the generation before it, and thus so going back in history. So for the first time ever, we'll see 5 generations in the workforce working together. And when we talk about millennials, which of course that's old news, that we do tell our students that they'll be in the workforce until about age 85, which some of us take a deep breath there and maybe suck all the oxygen out of the room, but they are living to be in excess of 100 years old because of the advances in healthcare. People are waiting to get married into their 30s now and having their first babies in their early to mid 30s. And so today when we define the 5 generations, we're going to talk about matures being those that were over 67, the baby boomers in that 1963 to 1946 age range, which I always tell people this is the generation that I'm in. I was born in 1963, so I'm right at the edge. I could have been a Gen Xer. I could have a lot of those characteristics because I'm right on the bubble. But what I find is because my parents were older when they had me, my mom was 28, my dad was 33, which was, very unusual back then. I have a lot of the mature characteristics. And then the Gen Xers, the millennials, and the iGens there. So each generation, what I like to tell people is there is no one best generation. They just all are different, and they bring unique qualities and ideas to the workplace, which is really important for people to remember as we talk through this. This chart's very important because if you see the jobs that have been created since World War II are in the green all the way across. And then if you look at the blue, unless you're colorblind or whatever, if you look at the blue spike there and where we're at in 2020, these are the people, the working age population. And so you can see we don't have nearly enough people to fill the jobs that we have out there and just go anywhere. Prior to the pandemic, everybody was hiring, and I know that there were a lot of people that were laid off and lost their jobs because of what's been going on, but even I've noticed in the papers and on the labor department's work site lately, the job announcements are everywhere. So there's going to be a lot of jobs out there for people, which is great news for our graduates going out. It also means that those people who thought they were going to retire at age 65 or so are being encouraged to stay in the workforce. And so, again, the generation influence.
Fighting soldiers from the sky, fearless men who jump and die, men who mean just what they say, the brave men of the Green Beret.
I often stop that song when President Cartney gives this presentation with me. He would let it play for a long time because, of course, that's his generation. And so the matures, of course, these were the people who brought a lot of duty, honor, country, dedication, sacrifice to the workplace. They were about the we first. They're very patient. They've been through a lot of hard times and then saw prosperity come after that, a lot of national pride, and doing a good job was the most important thing. And again, this generation, those born prior to 46, believed in the seniority thing. So in the workplace, they believe that because they've been there longer, maybe, that certain things come with that, which is very different than some of the generations that we see today. Oops. see. Sorry about that.
There comes a time when we heed a certain call, when the world must come together as one. There are people dying.
And just in the essence of time today, we usually play a little bit more of those video clips of music that goes with it. But, of course, because this is from my generation, if I have my way, I play that whole song. And usually sometimes I would love to play it through twice for the audience, but we laugh a little bit. For the boomers here, they were, born between 1946 and 1964. They defined their generation. They're defined a lot by their work ethic. They were the first generation to be labeled as the workaholics. And this is very true for me. We're used to working 60 to 80 hours a week, and we're proud of it. When we talk about, not going home, the 8 to 5 schedule, which a lot of the younger generations want to work. Sometimes we have an issue with that because we were taught to work until the job was done. We're very competitive. You can usually pick us out. You go to our offices, you'll see trophies, plaques, our graduation certificates, everything, up on the wall. So our success is largely visible. We are optimists. We were the first generation that became the consumers. Because we were always at work, we bought our kids stuff, and so when I'm giving this in person, I'll often ask the audiences, how many televisions did you have in the house that you grew up in? And it's funny to see through the generations because we were the generation that introduced, we buy a TV for every room because they were less expensive, and we did that and those kinds of things. And so we had the money because we worked the extra hours, so we became the consumers. Fast food, all that kind of thing. We were at work, so we would pick up takeout on our way home to feed our children, those kinds of things. And the things that were simple and easy, boxed macaroni and cheese, all those kinds of things came about during this era because we were at work. And so that was how we often defined ourselves.
Big bun. It's a very big bun. Big fluffy bun. It's a very big fluffy bun.
Where's the beef? Some hamburger places give you a lot less beef on a lot of bun. Where's the beef? At Wendy's.
And, of course, the famous Wendy's commercial, and some of you would remember that and some of you wouldn't, but the next generation X were those born into 65 and 79, about there. They were the first generation to question authorities. Their heroes are people that they met and people that they would know. They saw lifelong employment end, so maybe their parents worked for a company for years and then they got laid off. And so they were a little more cynical, a little more pessimistic, and their time horizons are shorter. They don't necessarily plan for a rainy day. And for them, the big change in this generation, and I bolded it on your screen, is that time became currency. They wanted more time off, more free time to live their life. And, of course, you can see why in the workplace that might be cause a little bit of friction with the boomers because we believed in, just working. And so this generation came along and said, we'll work hard for you, but we want to work 8 to 5 and we want to go home after that and have a life. And so they weren't necessarily wrong. They're just different. And so, and then, of course, they were the prove it to me generation, which I think came about because of what was going on during that time period.
We're not going to settle because we saw our parents settle. And we have options that we can keep hopping jobs. No longer is it bad to have 4 jobs on your resume in a year, whereas for our parents or even Gen X, that was terrible. But that's the new reality for us. And we're going to keep adapting and switching and trying new things until we figure out what it is.
And figuring it out takes time. Sociologists tell us that most Americans believe adulthood begins at 26 or older, and that having witnessed so many sacrifices by their parents to achieve middle-class security has had a huge impact. Family and friends are the new priorities, while careerism is beginning to fade.
We definitely put lifestyle and friends above work. No question about it.
Do you both feel that that's pretty much the way one should look at life?
I did.
Absolutely.
I did, yeah. I remember my dad getting laid off, all these things going up, and that's because they sacrificed for the company. Well, the first reaction for me is, I sure don't want to do that. I'm going to be in it for me, and I'm going to make it work.
Whoop. Now I got to go back here a minute. Well, goodness here. Sorry about that. I'm going to back up here just a second. Okay, so sorry about that. Technology and I are sometimes not friends. Okay. Millennials, when he was talking, and lots of times you hear them say at the end, you know, I'm going to be in this for me. A lot of times my students, even the technical age college students, I would say to them, you know, what sticks out about that little video clip? And they would say to me, well, it sounds really selfish. And so I think sometimes those older generations and even the younger students would say that, you know, I'm going to be in this for me and I'm going to make it work. Sounds very selfish, but I would tell them you should be. You should find a job that you really love and that you're going to do because it won't be work then for you. And if you don't really like what you're doing, you're not going to put your heart and soul into it. So hence the purpose of an education. The millennials came about since the 80s, and again, very unique characteristics. I love this group, although we blame a lot of things on millennials today, but I love this group because they're very, individualistic, they're optimistic. However, we, and I say we because I'm one of them, I have a 28-year-old and a 24-year-old, we as parents, we looked after them. They were very programmed. We put them in preschools at age 2 and 3, and then we scheduled all their activities all the way through. And we were kind of became those helicopter parents that us educators talk about. And so then we turn them loose after high school, and we expect them to just figure it out. Even our healthcare system, you know, they're allowed to stay on our health insurance until they're 26 years old. And so they don't have to have those kinds of responsibilities. And so it takes them a little bit more time. We would often say here at Lake Area that our students were coming to us out of high schools with higher test scores than ever before, more college credits under their belt, but they were very less mature than previous students. And I think it's because of that, you know, parents having them, you know, they're very looked after. And I'm just as guilty. My son, when he graduated from SDSU and moved out to Seattle, my oldest son, on the 15th of every month, I would text him and say, make sure that you pay your car insurance. And finally, after a couple of months being out there, he texted me back and said, you do realize, Mom, that I have auto deduct out of my bank account. You don't have to text me every month anymore. And so we've chuckled about that because I read his text and went, oh, my word, I'm one of them. I've become one of those helicopter parents. And so that letting go time, it just seems to be coming at a later age than it used to. When I went off to college at 18, if I hadn't paid my car insurance, you know, I'd have had to park my car because no one would have reminded me. We just didn't have the technology to do it back then either because we didn't have cell phones. And so I think that the world's very different and has allowed us to do that. They're more busy and stressed at a young age, and for many of them, they were raised as their parents' friends, those millennials. And so they have never had no said to them. We find that at the college level sometimes that's difficult for them. They often have huge goals, but they don't know how to get there. And so again, in the workplace, coaching them through and making sure you give them that constant kind of feedback that they're used to has become something that's, we feel like, us boomers feel like we shouldn't have to do that, but we do. Here's a commercial that's interesting, I think, if you watch this, and tell me what you see. That commercial on YouTube got more hits than the commercials from the Super Bowl when Ford released that. And I think it was because, you know, what do you see in there? You know, if you buy this, you're going to go and do and have all kinds of fun. Well, they were certainly not appealing to my generation. When we go out looking for vehicles, we're worried about safety, you know, gas mileage, those kinds of things. And so this commercial, when it was released, the first time they released a commercial on YouTube, had more hits than a Super Bowl commercial. And I think because that's where the millennials are watching and getting their, and where they would look to go buy a vehicle, very different than my generation, and they're looking for very different things in a vehicle. So again, just another example of generational differences. They, of course, have a different mindset, optimistic, programmed. We talked about this. Demand free time. We would often be very proud of the fact that our students here at Lake Area Tech would give, 100,000 hours of community service during their 2 years on our campus. And unlike my generation, because guess what, we were at work all the time, so we weren't as apt to volunteer to do those kinds of things. And so they're physically different, which I think is, if you were to dissect the brain of a millennial versus the brain of a baby boomer, you would see that their visual capacity is much larger than ours because of how they were brought up. They were brought up in front of video screens and those kinds of things, which we were not. And so they have an uncanny ability for technology and the way that they learn. And I think that impacts educators because they are more hands-on. They got to see stuff because that's how they have been brought up. And, of course, I need to update the slide a little bit because they're a little bit older than that. But the yellow ribbon across the bottom, I think, is really a significant difference for millennials versus the baby boomers and the matures is they're about living first and working second. And, again, not necessarily wrong, but very different from how we were about, your work came first and then you tried to fit the rest of your life in after that.
This and hurry up, the smell of burrito's getting cold. Gabriel, you forgot your satchel. Don't worry, please. Uncle Teddy's birthday tonight. Oh, she's cute. How was your day? Did you ask Mrs. Scudolero for that promotion? Dinner's on the table, smothered burritos.
Sometimes it's good to get smothered. Smothered in savory enchilada sauce and tasty melted cheese, Taco Bell's new smothered burrito is smothered in everything you love.
I love that commercial, even though I've made you all hungry for lunch now. I love that commercial because it truly is an example of a generational commercial about, older students moving back home in with mom and dad after graduating from college, and of course, us parents, how we do smother our kids and do everything for them, taking their satchel to work, doing all those kinds of things until they're much older. And so it impacts how they function in the workforce. We've even had students who go out and they will take a parent with them to a job interview. And so we've had to coach them, that's not okay, but they don't see anything wrong with that because they take mom or dad to do everything with them to that point. And so again, helping them to grow up and mature became part of the mission at Lake Area Tech, and I see that that will become part of our mission here at Mount Marty University as well. The next generation, which of course hasn't been very defined, some people call them Generation Z, some people call them iGen because they've always had the iDevices, very reliant on their technology, live in the moment, the gaming social media world, which I understand not very much about. I'm proud of myself when I can do some things on Facebook, and now my youngest son, who's 24, tells me that Facebook is for old people, Mom, and I only put stuff on there so that you will see it. So, they're using Snapchat and Twitter and all those kinds of things and other things that I don't even know what the initials stand for. But Facebook is old news to them. And so, again, just changing all the time. We also call this generation the TMI generation because we spent a lot of time coaching our students who are getting ready to graduate from Lake Area and go out and do interviews about how, you might share with your social friends, that it's okay about, how many beer cans you could stack on your head on a Friday night. But when you get employed at a job, you might not want to be sharing that with your boss or, on Monday morning, because if they're people from different generations, they might not think that's the coolest thing. And I can tell you that between my two boys, my 28-year-old and my 24-year-old, my 24-year-old will still call and tell me all kinds of stuff. And as I'm listening on the phone, I think, I can't believe he's telling me this. I would have never told my parents this. It's nice in that they doesn't keep a lot of secrets, but sometimes I go, yeah, I probably didn't really need to know that. Whereas my 28-year-old is very different. He doesn't do that. So just even the difference there in how they grew up. For them, the world's one big interface. We also teach our students here at Lake Area about the touching and gesturing kind of thing, because, and this is one thing I will explain a little bit, and then you'll have to watch for this as you go out there. But these students are used to, if you watch them when they're together in groups, they sit very close, they're in each other's space. Now with social distancing, I think they've probably been one of the ones that have had the hardest time. You know, when we see our students out in the cafeteria and things here at Lake Area on our campus, they're right next to each other, they're huddled in, they're sharing each other what's on their phones, they're right next to each other. Whereas you or I were taught in our generation, you know, if you could stick your hand out in front of you, that was kind of your own personal space. And the only people that came into that personal space were, of course, family or someone you were in an intimate relationship with. So our students, what was happening is they were getting jobs and they were going out, and we always asked for feedback from our employers, and we were saying, you know, how are our students doing? You know, what could we do better? And they would say, wow, you know, this generation is just so, confrontational. And we're like, confrontational? What do you mean? Well, they come up to you and they just get right in your face, you know, even to ask you a question. Well, the students don't mean it as confrontational. They're just used to being in each other's space. And so we would have to tell our students, you know, you have to respect people's personal space, particularly if they're not from your generation, because they don't know if you're going to hit them or ask them a question if you get right up in their face. And so, again, just a generational difference that's very evident with them. And so we talk about that. We don't assume that they know. And again, that's why I think that this generation talk is so important to our students, because if they understand the differences in the generations, it can help them be more successful as they go out there, whether it's working with teachers or employers or whatever the case may be. And then this generation has a huge sense of social justice, philanthropy, and maturity that maybe the millennials did not have, which I find and of course we don't, have them yet fully defined, but I find that refreshing from them. And some people actually also call them the mobile generation. When I was growing up, we found our freedom in our neighborhood, and that was true. We would leave on a Saturday morning, and our parents would say to us, I grew up in Denver and Minneapolis and Fargo, so big cities, and even in those big cities, we would leave on our bikes on a Saturday morning, and Mom would say, be home for supper. And if you weren't home by supper, then she might start looking for you, calling around to your friend's house and things. But we didn't have cell phones and that to keep track of, and people in the neighborhood knew who you were. So if you got into trouble, usually the news of the trouble got home before you did, because they would call your parents and rat you out. Now our kids grow up, with internet. They can cruise around the world, and we've taught them that the world isn't necessarily a safe place. So even in Watertown, South Dakota, where I am, if you drive by neighborhood parks, you won't see kids playing there by themselves unless there's an adult supervisor there, because it isn't safe. It's very different. And so we can't expect them to have the same kind of experiences that we had as young kids. And because we do teach them, everywhere on the news and everywhere, that the world isn't a safe place, hence the differences in how they've grown up as well. And so with this generation, we often teach our students that they need to have a supportive work environment. And if we could make a connection with an adult here on campus with our incoming students, we were more likely to retain them. And I think that's true as they go out in the workplace. If they have a boss, which they don't like that term, or a coach or a mentor that you pair them up with, who they connect with, they're more apt to stay. And again, keys to retaining them and teaching them is tell them how come it's relevant for them to know, and then tell them why it is. How do you think McDonald's and those places are getting workers? They're raising their entry-level wages because they're telling the kids you'll be able to live the way you want, have different experiences. Maybe it's the flexible schedule kind of thing. And I know for our students at Lake Area Tech, a lot of times we would tell them, they were more interested in the schedule and having more free time than they were in a higher wage range. And so if you would tell them you're going to get to work 4 10-hour days and have a 3-day weekend every weekend, they were more apt to take that job than the job that paid them $1 more an hour because they wanted more time off. And so again, the work industry has had to do a little bit of adapting, and I've often told the places that have talked to me about they're having a hard time hiring people, what can we do to attract more of the young people? I would say to them, well, you might have to change up a little bit of how you're doing it. If you look at the healthcare industry, they're doing a lot of that, 4 10-hour days, 3 12-hour days, and getting paid for 40 hours, where students have more time off. I have a niece who graduated from Lake Area Tech in practical nursing, and she went on and got her RN from USD, and she's 28 years old, and she's had 5 different jobs in the healthcare industry already. And when she left her last job, 8 to 5, Monday through Friday at a clinic, and took a night job at a hospital, working 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. 3 nights a week. She works 3 12-hour shifts, gets paid for 40 hours, has full benefits. And when she left, my whole family said to her, you're crazy. What are you doing? You had an 8 to 5 job Monday through Friday. It was perfect. You're going to get married. You'll start a family. You'll be having kids. It's perfect hours. And she turned to me and said, your generation, Kim, is the only one that thinks 8 to 5 Monday through Friday is good work hours. And it was kind of a slap in the face, but it was a reality check for me, because then she went on to say, I get 4 days off. And I said, I know, but you work nights, 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. Who wants to work that? And she said, I do. And she said, and a lot of my friends do, because we have 4 days off and we work 3. You work, 5 days and you still work 12-hour days. And she said, so again, it's just the way they look at things. It's different. And so she's right. Maybe my generation is the only one that thinks those are the awesome hours. But they each have to kind of find their way. And again, we define it the way we did it because we think that's the best way. Well, that's not necessarily the way it's going to be going forward for future generations. And I think we need to often remember that. I'll skip some of this stuff, but there again, the only thing on this slide I want you to pay attention to is that the impatient, the blue voicemail thing there, my 24-year-old won't listen to a voicemail to save his soul in his phone, and he can have his phone sitting in his lap, and if I call him, he might let it ring depending on what he's doing, but if I text him, I'll get an answer in less than 3 minutes. Again, ticks me off totally, and sometimes I have to text him and tell him to call your mother or I'm not paying for your cell phone anymore. And then he'll do it. But again, that's how they reply to their friends. And so if that's not okay at your place of work, you have to tell them. And we tell all of our students that come to Lake Area and to Mount Marty, you have to check your email. It's how we as an institution communicate with you. And they don't like email. They think it's obsolete. But when they go out in the workforce, if that's how their workplace communicates with them, then you have to pre-teach to them. You will have to learn to check your email. It might not be how you want to, communicate with your friends, but in your workplace, it will be how they communicate with you. And so, again, not assuming that they know that, you have to teach them. And so, because, again, we've kind of, led them along the way. And so, and it has its pros and cons, because for us, too, previous generations relied on parents or teachers to help explain something. This generation isn't bound by those constraints. When I call my oldest, 28, and say to him, what'd you do last weekend? And he's like, oh, I replaced a headlight on my Jeep. And I say to the guy who's not mechanical at all, how'd you learn how to do that? Well, you just YouTube video it, Mom. I would never think to go there and search for that. But again, their generation, just a very different mindset and how they grew up. Me, I would pay someone, $60 an hour at the shop to replace a headlight for me. That's just how I think. So again, differences in generations. Not better, not worse, just different. And so For educators, this is one of my favorite slides, and I'll go through it very, very quickly. But you know, this generation is likely to pursue careers they think will help them out. And so, and when they're solving a problem, they're going to look for a quick answer. And when they have to work through something, what we find with this generation is when it gets hard, they want to quit. And so sometimes you have to, you know, really coach them and encourage them, small steps along the way, telling them how that they're doing. You know, they like a lot of constant feedback. And if you leave them alone to solve some things and it gets tough, they're apt to say, well, I don't want to do this anymore. I want to quit. And you have to just keep encouraging them with that diligence and that perseverance that maybe we saw in some of the older generations that's not there right now, because you have to remember everything in the technology world is the real quick things. You know, the Snapchats, the texts, those kinds of things are very quick and easy for them, and so that's what they're used to doing. And not everything works that way. So they spend a lot of time in the relevant and the on-demand kind of learning and the just-in-time kinds of things. And so I think it's fair to say with the pandemic, at least I can speak for myself personally, in teaching and was teaching for Mount Marty in March when everything went online. I'm not a good online teacher, I don't think, you know, and I had to adapt, whereas I think my students found it a lot easier than I did.
Out here all day. Excuse me, I was waiting for that space. Yeah? Look, lady, we're younger and faster. So what? Girl, I'm older and I have more insurance.
Okay, that's just a fun little video clip to end. If you've never seen the movie Fried Green Tomatoes, I would encourage you to watch it. But again, just a little demonstration about the differences in generations and how they look at things. And you can't necessarily leave the presentation today and say that you learned to do that while you were here, but we've all maybe wanted to at times in our life. But again, of course, just the differences in way they look at things. So some just defining moments here to end quickly, things that definitely influenced the generations and how they were brought up. And if you're aware of the different viewpoints, you can help connect with them. And of course, things that this generation, you know, the iGens have always had, and many of us did not growing up. And so, of course, influenced the things. And oftentimes when I show this to the Lake Area Tech students in some of the classes, because we would go around and show this, try to get to every program sometimes in their 2 years here on our campus, they would ask me about some of those things, especially like David Letterman, and then I would really feel old because they'd tell me they don't even know who that is. So I think the older generations assume younger generations will define success the same way, and that's not true. And we also, some of us assume that, you know, in the workplace you have to pay your dues. And again, we're seeing young people being hired because of their technology skills coming in and making more money than some of us who have worked in it for 35 years. And of course, that's just the way that it goes. Fair, you know, I always would tell my students the fair is something that's held in Huron once a year. It's just different. And so, and then that we believe that the younger generations will never have to work as hard as we did to become successful. Well, they will work hard, but they'll work differently. You know, it might not be the physical labor, but the technology will allow them to do things just in a different way.
And part of
in the essence of time, questions that anybody might have for me, and I'll let Michelle kind of let me know if she sees any in there. But again, we like to just emphasize to the students, if they're aware of the differences and how people look at things, I think they can be better prepared for when they go out in the workforce, or really in any work environment where you're working together with different age groups of people. You probably can identify with a lot of things as we went through the presentation in your own schools, just different people of different generations working together, and why it is they maybe see things differently or do things differently. Because one of the big things that we saw, particularly as we got feedback from industry, is that our students, you know, are graduating here with wonderful skills, and we have a 99% placement rate. They go out and they get jobs. But 80% of them won't get fired because they don't have the skills to do the job. They get fired because they can't get along with people at the jobs that they work at. And so we realized that we needed to help train our students in acknowledging the differences in the generations and how they could better work together with them so that that wouldn't happen.